Well, if you took on all the responsibility you could take on, and you faced everything that you needed to face, what would you be like? Who would you be? And how would the world transform around you? If the partial answer is, well, if I do that a little bit, things get a fair bit better, then the next question might be, well, what if you did that completely? It isn't obvious to me what the upper limit of that is. And when you see people bear their suffering nobly, there's nothing in that but good. That's something. And then when you see people take on more responsibility and decide that they're going to aim up and confront their suffering honestly and forthrightly, that their lives get better and the lives of people around them get better too. The pathway to less suffering is through suffering. It's like, well, there's suffering. How do you make it worse? Run away. How do you make it better? Confront it. Yeah, but it's suffering. It's like, yeah, but it's there. It's a precondition for existence or something like that. And it's like you have something important to do as well. And you confront it, and that's the pathway to transcending it. I talked to my associate, my friend, about firing people, and he said, I enjoy it. And I said, that really surprised me. And this is someone I admire and respect, very competent person, by the way. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, I go into corporations and I ferret out the people who are kissing up and kicking down. I ferret out the narcissists. I ferret out the people who, as I alluded to, take credit when they haven't done anything and cast aspersions on others when they have done something and who are clearly not doing their job. And then also I go after people for whom it would be better in some real sense to be off doing something else. It was really interesting to me because it's also possible that some of these traits, the more psychopathic traits, have a positive utility socially, even speaking morally, when they're combined with other personality traits. Maybe it's not so bad to be low in agreeableness if you're high in conscientiousness.
One of the disadvantages of being high in agreeableness is that you're more likely to be a target for disagreeable types. So agreeable people are very generous and kind, and they're not backstabbing, and they're empathetic, and they're self-sacrificing. But there have been computer simulations, very sophisticated computer simulations, by evolutionary biologists of what happens if you get agreeable people together. So imagine you have a population of people and all of them are agreeable. Yes. And so they're cooperating away. It's all very kind and nice. But if you put one person in there who has psychopathic traits,
yes,
he just takes over everything.
Yeah.
And so the agreeable people always have the problem of how do you handle free riders, cheaters, and psychopaths? Right. And you might be utopian and say, well, those people just don't exist and they shouldn't exist and we shouldn't structure our societies that way, but that ain't going to cut it because psychopaths are always 3% of the population. They vary between 1 and 5.
Well, look, there's two great classes of fear, Michaela. There's only two. One of them is death and physiological and psychological disintegration. So you could think about that as the terror of biological vulnerability. That's one class of fears. The second great class of fear is fear of social exclusion. And part of the reason is that historically, if you're socially excluded, you're dead. So they're the same fear, because your social inclusion protects you from dying, right? You work with other people, you cooperate with them, you play with them, you eat with them, you're dependent on their labor. You're literally sustained in your life by your social desirability and your inclusion. And so if that's taken away from you, your reputation is sullied or shattered, people shun you. Not only are you lonesome and isolated, but you're really in trouble. And your nervous system reacts to that as if it's a mortal threat, which it is.
Women on average experience more negative emotion than men. So really? 75% of divorces are initiated by women, and women are more unhappy than men. And so they're more prone to depression and they're more prone to anxiety disorders. They're more prone to suicide attempts, although men commit suicide more often because they use guns, because men tend to be more violent even towards themselves. So women are higher negative emotion. And so why? Well, it kicks in at puberty. And so why would women become more sensitive to threat at puberty? They're at a physical disadvantage. Because boys and girls can wrestle and fight, but men and women can't. So men are way stronger, especially in the upper body. And so women hit men more than the reverse by a lot. So you might say, well, are women or men more violent? Well, if it's just blows struck, women win. But if it's blows that land, right,
that leave damage,
right, exactly. Women get comparatively weaker physically, so the world's more dangerous. Then they're more vulnerable sexually. Then they have to take care of infants. So they're tilted towards more threat detection.
If all women don't like you, It's you. And that's, that's so annoying. It's especially if you're young, because most women aren't going to like you. And it is you. So you have to grow up. But then, you got to understand that if you make yourself competent and productive and generous and a little bit socially skilled and reasonably clean, generally what women want is something like confident, productive generosity, fundamentally. And so, if that's allied with physical attractiveness and a sense of humor and, the sorts of features that a man would also look for in a woman, so much the better. But first of all, no one likes young men. So if women don't like you, it's like, well, that's par for the course. Who likes young men? No one. Why? Well, they're basically troublesome and useless. And so that's why. Don't be a fool. Turn yourself into someone who's worth being around, and then develop enough social skills so you advertise yourself genuinely. It's unbelievable how little genuine encouragement many people need, and how they had none. No one ever said to them and meant it, it's not okay for you to be a weak loser. It's not okay. And the reason it's not okay is because you could be way more than that. And it's a crime, an ethical crime, for you to allow all that necessary potential to go to waste. It hurts you, it hurts your family, it hurts the world. Really, really, it does. People tell me, well, you were so mean to Ellen Page. And I think, well, Ellen Page is a star, and she advertised her transformation and made the claim that this has revolutionized her life. And then she displayed her new body in a public forum and got 1.7 million Instagram likes for it, and probably enticed, well, let's say one young girl who's confused into becoming sterile, which is one too many for me, but it could be as many as what, 100, 500, 1,000? And I have my tendency to feel a hell of a lot more sorry for a set of confused, isolated, and lonely pubescent girls who have no one to love them enough to help them appreciate who they are than I do for one overprivileged and unfortunately confused narcissistic Hollywood star. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you are, and you don't know where you're going. And if you're in a place where you don't know where you are or where you're going, you're in danger, because that's unmapped territory, and God only knows what lurks in unmapped territory. And you can think about that biologically. If you're somewhere you don't understand and you don't know where you're going, well, there's always the possibility of predation. But you can think about it metaphysically too, and that's worthwhile. If you're so confused and disoriented that you don't know where you are or where you're going, there are predators of the spirit who are much worse than snakes that are waiting in wait for you. And the probability that you'll move from aimless, hopeless, joyless anxiety to nihilism, corrosive bitterness, and genocidal fantasy in the fundamental extreme is very high. And so that's possession by a predator of the spirit in the desert of the soul. And that's real. Any 12-year-old boy can now see more beautiful naked women in 15 minutes than the richest king in history ever saw in his whole life. You think, well, we don't have to worry about that. It's like, yeah, you have to worry about that. That's a huge problem. I was often saying things just so that I would win arguments and be right. And then I also noticed that when I was doing that, I had a deep sense of falsehood and disquiet, right? And I felt that when I was really paying attention, I could see that doing that made me weak. It made me weak and defensive and prideful and narcissistic, all of those things. And then insistent that I was right and kind of totalitarian. And so then I started to listen to what I was saying and to feel it out. Now, I was reading Carl Rogers at the same time, and he believed that your actions and your words should be in alignment. But not only that, that your physiological being and your words should be in alignment. He said if you paid enough attention, you could tell when you were, let's say, not being true to your core self, something like that. And I think that's a test for the authenticity and the truth of the words, is that they're not prideful, they're not designed to win, they're designed to provide you with a firm foundation under your feet. If you're a man born in a woman's body, that's biologically determined, but if you're a woman born in a woman's body, that's socially constructed. It's like, okay, good luck with that theory.
Right. I don't believe you can be a man born in a woman's body or a woman born in a man's body. What I believe is that there are some people who feel alienation towards their bodies and they want to remove
Well,
body
everybody
parts.
feels that.
Right, but they feel it to such an extent that clinically the best treatment for them is to transition and live as if they were the other sex.
Well, I don't think that there's any evidence that that's clinically the best treatment. We certainly don't know enough to make that presupposition, and I think we're playing with fire assuming that that's the case. The long-term outcome studies certainly don't demonstrate that. One of the things that psychotherapists have realized in the last 60 years or so is that if you can get people to voluntarily confront the things that disturb them and compel them into paralysis and avoidance, and possibly even tyranny, right? Those are the things people would like to avoid if they could, but often can't because they're the harsh realities of life, let's say. The more you can get people to expose themselves to the things they're afraid of and disturbed by voluntarily, the braver and more healthy they become. If you gaze upon that which terrifies you long enough and hard enough and with enough diligence, you don't see death and destruction. You see the possibility of renewal and rebirth, because that's the spirit that is called out of you if you're courageous enough to confront the terrible realities of life. And as far as I can tell, that's psychologically true.
Women were oppressed for centuries. I mean,
Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that men and women were oppressed for centuries. I mean, there are certain burdens that women bore that men didn't bear, but the opposite is equally true.
Yeah, but
men suffered dreadfully, for example, in incredibly dangerous occupations.
But it's a fact that women suffered more than men.
I don't believe that, no, and I don't think it is a fact. I think that most people suffered by modern standards immeasurably, and that I don't buy the historical narrative that the fundamental reality of our history was that men were oppressing women. First of all, women aren't that easy to oppress, as you might have noticed if you've ever had a relationship with them. And you might say, well, it took women a long time to struggle forward until they attained civil rights status that was equivalent to men, and I would say that's true, but it also was the case for men that it took a very long time to struggle forward before there was anything approximating individual rights, and that they were granted to women quite rapidly in the aftermath of that.
Jordan Peterson sends out a chilling warning in a recent interview. Are we in trouble? Just watch.
This is not on people's radar. It's like people have no idea. It's like, well, why not have a digital passport? I mean, you know, how convenient. It's like, fair enough, and you can understand that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could pay for everything with our phones? It's like, wouldn't it be nice if the central government, who's woke-oriented and makes carbon dioxide remediation the priority, knows exactly what you spend on everything so they can target you tax-wise with precision? It's like, oh, you can see these signs of this everywhere. You know, when you go through airports now, there's a lot of automated barriers. You show your passport. It's like, well, these are automated barriers. What if you can't go through them? Well, that's the situation for many people in China. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to argue with the machine? Like, you just cannot imagine how screwed you are.
I think it is extremely smug and complacent to think civilization has peaked, it's all upwards from here.
Yeah, well, good luck with that, I suppose.
It's a living. There are lots of people who agree with me. There are lots of people clearly who agree with you.
There are just a lot of people, I would say, who are coming to listen to what I say because they're sick and tired of having their desire to move forward in the world and to achieve something and to take their place as adult males, let's say, who are under the weight of accusations that their ambition and forthrightness is a manifestation of something that's fundamentally tyrannical. They're not happy with that. It's not doing anyone any good, and it's also not true. It's really a terrible thing to do to young men, and it's happening all the time. That's why they're bailing out of universities like mad. There won't be a man left in the social sciences in 10 years in the universities, and it's no bloody wonder. It's an unhospitable place, and it's unhospitable precisely because of this doctrine.